Hey everybody, welcome to Fast Football Talk. I hope that you all are having a great day, and I hope that we can make it even better because today we are going to be breaking down my top 3 least favorite draft classes by team from this year's draft. So without any further ado, let's hop right in. The Los Angeles Chargers start off today by receiving the distinction of my third least favorite draft in this class. And honestly, in this spot, I think that you can make a case for several other teams, such as the Steelers, Bears, and Redskins, who didn't impress with their limited capital, or the Dolphins, whose class was ultimately disappointing with how much capital they had to grab impact players for the future. But ultimately, the Chargers class stuck out with many picks that I believe this team will end up regretting in a few years' time. With the 6th overall pick, the Chargers selected Justin Herbert, quarterback out of Oregon. Pretty much everybody knew that quarterback had to be the pick here after letting Rivers walk after nearly a decade and a half. My problem with this pick is simply my concerns that I have with Justin Herbert as a player. I get why people do like him as the potential future for this team. He clearly has every physical gift that you ask for. He's tall, strong, fast, and already has one of the strongest arms in the league. But Herbert just has so many issues in his game, and I don't know if they can ever be coached out of them. Herbert has some serious accuracy issues in all parts of the field due to shaky mechanical issues, and his mental processor is the thing that needs the biggest work. All too often, Herbert locked onto his first read, ignoring his progressions, and either threw the ball into tight coverage, making a bad decision, or immediately bailed from the pocket and scrambled too soon, which is another trait that you see too much of on his tape due to a poor understanding of pocket presence, a part of the game that many quarterbacks have a large struggle getting a natural feel for. In the NFL, we've seen too many quarterbacks with processing issues: Mitch Trubisky, Jameis Winston, Blake Bortles, Paxton Lynch, who all failed to grasp the mental aspects, tools, and timing of the quarterback position and led their team to dangerous results. But to me, most importantly, Herbert never progressed during his time at Oregon. He stayed the same quarterback, mistakes and all, which for me raises some serious concerns about his work ethic and ability to minimize his bad traits to the next level. Ultimately, with the Herbert pick, I don't hate the process or philosophy. If you believe that you have the guy at quarterback, I endorse taking him regardless of a reach down the board to get him. However, if you are going to reach, you ultimately have to be right about the player. If Herbert becomes the player his physical tools suggest he could be, then the rest of this draft class will become irrelevant. But unfortunately, I do think that is highly unlikely to happen here in Los Angeles, and I strongly believe that Herbert will become the next NFL quarterback bust. Next, the Chargers package their 2nd and 3rd rounds to move up to pick number 23 overall and take Kenneth Murray, linebacker from Oklahoma. My opinion on this selection is the opposite of the last. I like the player, but I don't like the process in which they took him. They quite simply sacrificed too much in a trade-up for a luxury pick at linebacker when this team has many more important holes on the roster along the offensive and defensive lines. I think that Murray will be a good player here and the best player that the Chargers take from this draft class, but ultimately the 2 day 2 picks given up would have been better spent on linemen to help their new quarterback, who already struggles with issues in the pocket. With their next pick in the 4th round, the Chargers grabbed Joshua Kelly, running back out of UCLA. I don't like this pick. I like the positional selection of a running back to pair with the smaller Eckler and Jackson after the departure of Melvin Gordon, but Joshua Kelly would not have been my ideal selection. He's a back who I don't think does any skill particularly well, and this team would have been better off taking other backs on the board like LaMichael Pirine, Anthony McFarland, or DJ Dallas, who would all complement Eckler's skill set better. In the 5th, the Chargers then selected receiver Joe Reed from Virginia. And while we're talking about Reed, I'll also lump in their 7th round pick at receiver, KJ Hill from Ohio State. Both are pretty similar players. They'll do their best work in the slot, and Reed does have some outside receiver potential. Receiver depth, I think, is one of the most overlooked needs on this roster by people. After Allen and Williams, there are really no competent depth receivers, and they're especially missing a starter in the slot. I think between Reed and Hill, they'll be able to find a slot starter for this year and have the flexibility to move on from Allen or Williams in the near future. Both of these shots at receiver were great and total steals on day 3. Finally, in the 6th, they took Alohi Gilman, safety out of Notre Dame. This is a fine pick at safety, which I think is still a neat opposite Derwin James, but I think for this team to come out of the draft without any shots at offensive or defensive linemen is inexcusable and tells me that this front office lacks an understanding of their roster as it stands. Overall, the Chargers had potential for a great draft, but misunderstood their roster, just spent too many picks in luxury positions, and spent a high pick on a quarterback that I think they will end up regretting in 4 years' time. Staying in the AFC West, the Las Vegas Raiders get to become the selection for my second least favorite draft class. With their first round selection, the Raiders took Henry Ruggs, wide receiver from Alabama. Now, I have my fair share of issues with this being the pick here. I really like Ruggs as a player, but he wasn't the right player for the Raiders. I think that Ruggs' deep threat ability will ultimately be wasted in Las Vegas until they can get a different quarterback than Derek Carr, who will actually be willing to take shots downfield and make plays with his best receiver. Judy or Lamb would have both been better picks here, as their skill sets mesh better with Carr, and they are more likely than Ruggs to transcend beyond a complementary receiver into a true number one, something that I don't know if Ruggs will ever be able to do. Ultimately, it's hard to hate this pick because of the quality player they got in Ruggs. I just think that they left behind the potential for so much more and put Ruggs into a situation where he might struggle until they can get more pieces to highlight his talents. Then, with their next first-round pick, the Raiders took Damon Arnett, cornerback out of Ohio State. And after this awful reach of a pick, and last year's disastrous reach on Clelin Ferrell, Mayock and Gruden have shown that they have an utter inability to read the market, and they hurt this team by whiffing on the perceived value of prospects and overreaching for incredibly floor-dependent players who have no upside in their careers beyond reaching a league average level at their position. There's nothing inherently awful about Arnett's game, but there are so many better corners on the board that would have been better selections than grabbing a player who is a late day 2, borderline day 3 prospect. And then the media try to justify this pick on draft night by calling him a perfect scheme fit or one of Gruden's grinders, but that's all just padding to try to justify this whiff of a pick to fans of this team. Arnett isn't a perfect Raiders scheme fit, as they basically run every variation of man and zone coverage, so this pick isn't even salvaged by him being the perfect corner in this class for their scheme. Just an awful pick here that displays ineptitude to read the market properly. Then, with back-to-back picks in the third round, the Raiders took 2 receivers in the hybrid gadget, Lynn Bowden Jr. from Kentucky and the big-bodied Bryan Edwards from South Carolina. Another 2 picks that I really didn't like here. The Raiders again reached when there were so many better players and receivers still on the board. Bowden is my favorite of the 2. I think as a gadget piece, Gruden will be able to scheme up nice plays and touches for him in this offense, whether that's in the slot or in the backfield. He should be able to find a spot as a role player on this team despite the reach. The Edwards selection I don't really like at all. Total reach on a receiver whose only skill set is his contested catch ability, and he has trouble separating and running routes. He's a raw player who should have been a day 3 pick, and if they wanted that skill set, there's still receivers on the board who do it better than Edwards, like Isaiah Hodgins, Tyler Johnson, and Colin Johnson, who would have been better selections for this team. With their last third-round pick, the Las Vegas Raiders took safety Tanner Muse from Clemson. This pick is okay. I don't dislike it. I thought that this was good value for Muse at the end of day 2. I'm just curious about what their plan with Muse is. He projects as a big run-defending safety, so I'm curious to see where they'll play him, as they already grabbed a box safety in Jonathan Abram in last year's draft. I think this move means the team will try to play Abram at free safety, which they seem so confident he can play, which I quite clearly have a very different opinion on. So it'll be interesting to see where Muse lines up next year. With their first 4th-round pick, they took John Simpson, guard from Clemson. Simpson can turn into an average run blocker for this team, who has a quickly aging interior line, but I think that if they were taking depth, there were still better interior linemen on the board with higher upsides, such as Netane Moody or Shane Lemieux. Finally, with their last pick, the Raiders took Amik Robertson, corner out of Louisiana Tech. This is probably my favorite pick in the draft for the Raiders. I think that Robertson was one of the best nickel players in the draft, and he should be able to carve out a nice role being this team's starting nickel player for a while. Overall, this class has some serious issues with the value of players that they received, and this draft combined with last year's bad draft makes this team the clear loser of the Khalil Mack trade and hurts their long-term competitive nature in the AFC West. To no surprise, the Green Bay Packers get recognized as my least favorite draft class this year. Conversely to how I claim the Ravens, my favorite draft class, will be remembered as an all-time great draft class, I think that this Packers draft will be remembered as one of the worst in recent NFL history. With their very controversial first-round pick, the Raiders traded up to select Jordan Love, quarterback out of Utah State. And it seems that everybody with an opinion either loves this pick or absolutely bashes it and the fact that they didn't take a receiver with this pick. But to me, this is my favorite pick for them in this entire draft. I really like Love as a prospect. For me, he was very close with Tua for my number 2 quarterback and edged him out due to his upside and potential. Like Herbert, Love has all the physical tools to be an elite quarterback, but his red flags aren't nearly as large as they are in Herbert's case. Love is further along in his development in terms of all the things Herbert struggles to grasp: accuracy, read progressions, and pocket presence. In his time at Utah State, Love improved upon the mental nuances of the game, even though his production declined in 2019 due to a large personnel turnover. To me, if there's any raw quarterback prospect this year who can be compared to a Patrick Mahomes type player, it's Jordan Love. And I think Green Bay is the perfect spot for him, as he'll be able to sit and learn, and I think that in 1 to 2 years' time, Love will take the league by storm and be the next young elite quarterback in the NFL. Then in the second round, the Packers selected running back A.J. Dillon from Boston College, and this is where this draft gets stupid. It's insane to me that they still passed up on impact receivers on the board like Duvernay and Reed, and then they took a running back who's good at what he does, which is just pure power, but an awful scheme fit for their outside zone running scheme. If anything, the Packers needed an outside zone running back to back up Aaron Jones, not a guy with same power skills that they already have on the roster with Jamal Williams. This is a dumb pick that makes no sense for this team. Then in the third round, Green Bay took tight end Josiah DeGara out of Cincinnati, and this is another bad pick. First, for the obvious reason, they still didn't address their biggest need, receiver. But second, if you want to draft a mismatched tight end for Rodgers to use as a receiving weapon, fine. But then they didn't do that. They took a blocking tight end who projects better as a fullback when there were true receiving tight ends on the board like Troutman, Bryant, Okwegbunam, or Keene. Taking a fullback in the third doesn't need to be explained anymore about why it's so bad. In the fifth round, the Packers took linebacker Kamal Martin from Minnesota. This is probably the best pick past Love. The Packers have had a need at inside linebacker for a while now, and this gives them some athletic depth and upside at the position. In the sixth round, the Packers loaded up along the offensive line, taking guard John Runyon, center Jake Hansen, and tackle Simon Stepaniak. I like all the positions they addressed here along the line, which is definitely in need of an addition of youth. They didn't grab very great players here, but it's the end of the sixth, so they took some shots on some guys. The one pick out of these that I really don't like, though, is Stepaniak. As the pick immediately following, the Eagles took Prince Tega Wanogho, who is a much better developmental tackle prospect than Stepaniak. Then, with their seventh round pick, the team took safety Vernon Scott from TCU. This is a pretty okay shot at a seventh round safety. The depth in this secondary is pretty abysmal, and Scott has versatility at both corner and safety, so I'm sure he'll be able to contribute as a role within this defense at some point. Finally, with their last pick, the Packers took interior defensive lineman Jonathan Garvin from Miami. This is a late 7th round pick, but not one that I like very much. He's undersized to play interior and will probably be better on the edge with some good power rush skills. Just an okay shot at a player who isn't a perfect scheme fit. Overall, this was a very poor draft for the Packers. If Love becomes a superstar quarterback in a couple years, it will make this class better. Yet coming out of this draft class without a single pick at receiver is inexcusable, and it definitely will hurt this team for the near future. And we're back. Well, guys, those are my picks for my 3 least favorite draft classes this year. Be sure to check in the comments with which draft classes or draft picks were your least favorite this year. I want to sincerely thank you for watching and enjoying the content. And with all that out of the way, this is Fast, signing off with a mile-high salute.